Hi, and welcome to episode 2 of Chant Talk. My name is Patrick Torsell, and today we're going to introduce Chironomy, that is, conducting of Gregorian Chant. Now, this is 2 episodes in 1 week. Don't get used to that, but I'm just trying to kick off the new series with a nice little push here. So, we're going to talk about Chironomy, and before we can really get too deep into actual conducting, we have to be reminded of some of the rhythmic concepts of Gregorian Chant. So we know that in chant, we have what's called a free rhythm system. It's not metered rhythm like most modern compositions would be, most polyphonic compositions, most hymns, all of these things are what's called metered rhythm. And what that means is it takes your primary beat and puts it into measures containing the same number of beats. So for example, you might hear of a piece of music written in 4/4. That means there's 4 beats to a measure. And a quarter note equals 1 beat, but that's another topic entirely. We know that there's 4 beats in that measure, and so we can count it 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Or it could be 3 beats, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. Could be really, realistically, almost any number of beats, but the point is, in metered systems, they're put into this box, into these measures, and there's always the same number of beats in a measure unless the time signature changes. Well, in Gregorian chant, it's not like that. We don't have this system of metering into measures. Instead, it's an unmetered free rhythm. And the way that Gregorian chant works is that it combines groupings of 2 and 3 beats freely to produce the rhythm. So we could have 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 1, 2, or any combination of these groupings of 2 and 3. Now, in metered music, you can take the primary beat. For example, if it's 4/4, the quarter note is your primary beat, and you cut that in half into eighth notes. So if we start with our quarter notes at 1, 2, 3, 4, we cut that in half. We could have 1 and 2 and 3 and 4 and we could cut those eighth notes in half into 16th notes. 1 eanda, 2 eanda, 3 eanda, 4 eanda. We could divide it into triplets, 1 triplet, 2 triplet, 3 triplet, 4 triplet. So that's called subdivision of the beat in metered music. But since chant isn't metered, again, it doesn't work like that. We don't have this ability to subdivide. In Gregorian chant, our rhythm is based entirely and built entirely off of the primary beat. There's nothing shorter or subdivided from it. The primary beat is the shortest beat, and that's represented by the punctum in our chant notation. So we have nothing shorter or smaller than your primary beat. And so when we're talking about these rhythmic groupings, it's always grouping full single beats together with neumes. And so we get these patterns of 2 and 3, which then combine freely. And then we have beat 1 falling between these neumes, 1, 2, 1, 2, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, and that is where the ictus is placed, and so that gives impetus to the rhythm. We know where beat 1 falls, and that keeps our rhythm our musical rhythm moving along. And it is important to note that while the word accent is part of the rhythmic discussion, it is not the entirety of the discussion. There's a word accent, and then there's also a musical accent. And when we're singing chant, even though we have to be sensitive to the word accent, the musical accent is the most important accent. Often it will fall on the word accent as well, but sometimes it doesn't. And that's because the composers of these chants were painting a bigger picture than just trying to line up accents. That's not their goal. Their goal is to paint the big picture of the chant with all of the words and the meaning of those words. And so there are going to be musical accents that don't always fall on word accents. So it's important to know that, and it's important to follow and interpret the musical accents properly, but you should inform your interpretation from the word accents as well. Now, we have the beat 1 then, and we have 2 kinds of motion in chant rhythm. We have the arsis, which is a rising motion, and the thesis, which is a falling motion. And we can determine whether it's arsic or thetic movement by whether it's at a point of growth and impetus, or whether it's a point of fall and rest. And so the arsis is always a building motion, it's a rising up, and the thesis is always the falling back down. And so we have these growths and the impetus, and then we have the resting, and we have the growth, and we have the fall, and the rise, and the fall. And you may have 2 or 3 arses in a row. You may have 2, 3, 4 theses in a row. But there's always this movement back and forth between the rise and the fall. And it goes with the phrasing, the rise and the fall of the phrase. And it's these arses and theses which tell us how to conduct the chant. And so the arsis is this motion like this, and the thesis falls like this. Let me turn around real quick so that you can see how that would look if you were doing it. So we have arsis, arsis, thesis, thesis. Arsis, thesis. Arsis, thesis, thesis. So the arsis always comes back around this way and up and over, and the thesis just bounces over here. And when we talk about how to make nice smooth motions for conducting, if you actually think about kind of leading with this part of your hand below your thumb, think of leading right there. It'll make a nice smooth motion. And this is a good thing to just practice. Just practice. Arsis, thesis. Arsis, thesis. And then start linking 2 arses, arsis, arsis. Thesis, thesis. Arsis, arsis. Thesis, thesis. So spend a little time with that kind of motion. Arsis, thesis. Of course, normally we conduct chant with just one hand, although occasionally, if you got a big choir, you may get 2 hands going on it. But get comfortable with this idea of the rise of the arsis and the fall of the thesis, and the rise of the arsis and the fall of the thesis. And if you practice that, then next week, our topic is going to be continuing with chironomy, going into the next steps. We're going to break down a couple of chants, including the asperges, because I want to use, in my examples in these videos, I want to use chants that are going to be practical to you in the parish setting, in the context of the extraordinary form of the Mass, or even in some cases in the ordinary form of the Mass. So we're going to take a look at the asperges and probably a couple of other common chants, and we're going to analyze them. We're going to look at the phrasing, we're going to look at the arsis and the thesis and where they fall. We're going to look at where all of the ictus placements go, so that we can determine all these things, and then we're actually going to draw in the chironomy of the arsis and thesis throughout the piece, and then we're going to practice together conducting those pieces. So we'll see you next week on Chant Talk, and we'll continue learning about chironomy. God bless you.